possible Davante Adams, Jameson Williams swap. Davante Adams going to the contending Detroit Lions this year. And Jameson Williams, who the Lions haven't really utilized. I know he just came back off his suspension, but I mean, Dan Campbell's the king of not using first round draft picks that are offensive weapons and talents. So Jameson Williams could find a home elsewhere. I'll let you elaborate.
Yeah, so this was one that I kind of thought of a few weeks ago when I believe the Raiders were sitting at 1-3. Adams' frustration was really growing. Now they've won 2 games since then, but from what I understand from his press conferences, Adams is still very frustrated here. Like he's not like, oh, well, we're back to 3-3, great. I think he's still a little unhappy here. Now I think this would only the only way I think the Raiders would trade Davante Adams at this year's trade deadline is if he requests a trade, like not even requests, demands a trade. And is like, I'm going to sit out, really. And
which is very likely.
However, would be quite the development to happen over the next 12 days. And that's the reason why, like, this one and the next one, which we'll talk about in a second, are going to be a little bit on the more unrealistic side. I think this one, like, to say that this is, like, probably going to happen is insane. Because, like, the odds of Davante Adams getting dealt probably pretty low to begin with, not to mention Jameson Williams, who hasn't been put into a single bit of trade buzz. However, let's say this does happen. Davante Adams is now a Lion. Dude, we're talking about the Lions. We just put out a video. Go check that out about the Lions being a Super Bowl team now, currently constructed. You add Davante Adams onto that with Amon-Ra St. Brown. And honestly, dude, the Lions aren't even losing their deep threat because their deep threat's Josh Reynolds. Like, Jameson Williams was house money at this point with how they've been playing without him. You now can add Davante Adams in here. I mean, am I crazy to say that they become the favorite in the NFC? Like,
you're not.
Because
you're not at all.
The way their defense
and then Davante
playing,
Adams, with all this attention that he's going to take on the outside, with Amon-Ra coming out of the slot, that's going to open things up so much for him.
And Sam Laporta. Gosh. Sam Laporta's still there, by the way. And guess what? Dave Montgomery been running the ball like a maniac. Once he gets back healthy, they still have that running game going. They can still use Jahmyr Gibbs in the same ways that they probably were planning to use Jameson Williams if they really want to get crazy with it. Maybe not all the way down the field, but like getting him the ball, manufacturing him those touches, using his speed, very well could be a huge asset for them. And Jared Goff, playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, definitely is like an MVP candidate right now. You added Davante Adams into that offense, man. And the way that the creative ways they could use him,
Packers again.
Yes, like, and he gets the Packers
in the division.
Yeah, they've already played him once, so he'll get them again. But that's definitely going to be like he's going to have fun doing that for sure. I think this makes a lot of sense. Now let's do the Jameson Williams to the Raiders. Now the Raiders, it's very like they're 3-3 right now, which is very that's fine and well. I don't think the Raiders are going anywhere this year. I don't think the Raiders are probably going anywhere next year. The defense has been playing better, but I still think it's too far away. The offense is fine, but you don't have your quarterback of the future in here. Like, you just don't. And I think that Davante Adams... Oh, shut up. I think Davante Adams is kind of carrying this offense right now to a lot of the offensive production that they've had. If you take him out, you start dwindling off a little bit, and it's just a matter of what direction they want to go into. If they do want to go in that direction, then this is the move, because Davante Adams is 30 years old and is getting paid a lot of money. This also frees up $20 million in cap space here. And you get a guy in Jameson Williams who could be what you were looking for in Henry Ruggs. I know that was a different... I didn't
want to say that. I didn't want to say that.
I know, and I know that was a different regime, but they have nobody on this team that can take the top off the defense. Now, if you trade away Davante Adams, you lose a lot of things, but at least with this, you gain a guy that could be, like, this was the number 12 pick in his class. This was a guy that many people had as the top wide receiver in his class. If he becomes that guy, then you're really feeling good about this trade. You also acquire a second-round pick in this deal, which is big for a team that's, could be looking to trade up in the draft, because they're going to be probably around that, like, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 range. Like, let's say Chicago's at 1-3. You want to go get Drake May. They can add more ammo to go do that with this deal. I get that it's Davante Adams, but I just don't think he fits their timeline, and I don't really understand. I mean, we can really go back.
We don't understand why he ended up there in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was very critical of that, especially when that division started to load up, and you're like, man, if you just traded Derek Carr and got out of this business, they could be competing right now, but they aren't. Whatever. Derek Carr's gone. Davante Adams isn't happy here. Like, there's a very real world where this offseason this happens anyway.
That's the thing that's the catalyst of this whole thing.
And
Is
yeah,
like Davante Adams is actually upset, and I
cl-
know he came out with something earlier today that
he
was
did.
like even more
Like,
like,
saying we
ugh.
strive for greatness, and clearly he doesn't think that the Raiders are that. Like, this guy, especially with the pace that he's on and the fact that he's continuing to put up numbers at his age, could very well go. He's going to be a Hall of Fame wide receiver, man. He does not want to spend the last few years that he's got left of productive football playing with Jimmy Garoppolo. Then maybe, hell, it could be Aiden O'Connell next year. It could be any number of guys that could not be it. And that could be the end of Davante Adams' career by the time this contract in Vegas is up. He has no playoff success added. He's just added a bunch of counting stats, which are probably not going to be as good as they would be even here in Detroit, where, maybe a year or two from now, he's the wide receiver 2 here to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Who knows? But he's definitely going to be able to support, this team and help himself as well. I'm not saying that's all he's out to do here, but he's definitely going to be looking out for himself a little bit. Like, he'd much rather go to Detroit where he can win and put up numbers at the same time than just continue to put up numbers here in Vegas. Again, I prefaced it with this, but this probably only happens if Davante Adams demands, requests, whatever verbiage you want to use, where he asks out of Vegas. Like, I don't think Vegas just like, oh, okay, well, we're going to trade Davante Adams now.
But I think that's likely.
But I
Like
think
I
this
don't
makes
even
I think this makes a lot of sense. Like, I know, like, I texted some of my friends and like mentioned it, and they were like, "No, that's insane. Like, why would they do that?" But like, what is Vegas doing? What is their direction right now? I get that they went out and got Jimmy Garoppolo and they're franchise tagging Josh Jacobs. You have a redo opportunity after you did that. You went all in on Derek Carr. That didn't work out. You have another opportunity to potentially start over here if you just let Josh Jacobs walk. You trade Davante Adams. Jimmy Garoppolo has void years. You can start him. You can use him as a bridge. You can use him as a backup.
because you'll be stuck with Davante Adams in that huge contract. Like he could do great things for you, but you
Like,
can't. It can't be Davante Adams by himself.
and he's fantastic, but his value only continues to go down as the days go on because his contract number is going up, but so is his age. Like,
Yep.
and eventually, like, this guy is fantastic. I didn't think he'd be as productive as he's been this year, but at some point it's going to happen. And at some point he's not going to be the Davante Adams that we're seeing, that we saw in Green Bay, and even the Davante Adams that we're seeing right now. Like, at some point that's going to happen. You
God
don't
forbid
want to
injuries. Injuries are probably creeping up on him.
you don't want to be holding that bag when that happens, especially when you're as devoid of, I mean, not to say that they're devoid of talent is a little unfair, but they definitely have a lot of work to do before they're like, okay, this is a legit playoff contender. And
Exactly.
if this asset that they could get a guy who, in Jamison Williams, it could be their wide receiver 1 for the foreseeable future. Granted, there's been little evidence to support that in Detroit, but we know that he's not been being utilized really at all. He had some injuries. He had the suspension. We've seen one game of him this year. He did catch a touchdown, so that's good. Lions need to be selling that. Hey, he caught a touchdown this week. But yeah, I think this trade makes a lot of sense for both sides. Again, the realism of it becomes the question, but I think if this happens, I think a lot of people would be blown away, but I think it's a good trade.
Yeah, I agree. Like I obviously with my next trade, on the spicy side as well. But I mentioned it before the episode. I think that this is going to be. I think this could be very well the most active trade deadline we've ever seen in the history of the league, just because of what's been happening over the past couple years. So I think a trade like this, it would shock me. It would shock everybody. But I think that we will see more trades like this as we go forward into the future. Whether or not it's at this deadline, we'll see. But I think that we're going to see more trades, more superstar trades at the deadline, and it could be Davante Adams headed to Detroit.